Well, this is kind of more my heyday starts because I was born in 1981, and my dad went to the School of Visual Arts. And growing up, there was a whole pile of, Starlog and comic scene, those comic book magazines. So like as a kid, I was like the weird kid who already, like at the age of 4, was like, I don't know who Frank Miller is, but he sounds amazing. And there's this electric character. So this is one of my heydays. And your first pick on our list that we shared was Dragon Ball. So talk about Dragon Ball for us.
Yeah, so I know this is comics through the decades, but we
Mhm.
can't talk about comics without talking about manga. So, we have to go into all of comics, right? Sequential art as a whole, super important to not just look at what's coming out in the United States, but to look at the entire world and specifically Japan. Dragon Ball, I think, we know how popular the anime is and still is to this day.
Mhm.
But the original manga is still like super, super relevant, super well done. One of my favorite series of all time. And I've got the entire series in like these big editions. One of them is in the background here. But it's just it takes some inspiration. Obviously the origin of Goku is similar to Superman, but the story goes in a completely different direction. And I don't know what else to say about it than if you haven't read the original Dragon Ball, it's much different than Dragon Ball Z. So there's a lot more comedy. There's a lot more down to earth stuff. It's not, constant battles in outer space. It's a lot more about the characters. So that's why Dragon Ball is one of my 1980s recommendations.
I'm going to throw in, I'm not really the most well-read manga person, but I'm going to throw out my recommendation on that is Lone Wolf and Cub. That I love that. It's just the story of a rogue samurai taking care of this small infant slash child. Like it's the basis of so many great things, whether it's Wolverine in the 80s, or even if you look at The Mandalorian with him, having Grogu as his foundling and just protecting him at all costs in a crazy. Yeah, it's such good stuff.
Yeah, there's so much groundbreaking material. And what's interesting about it is that these are, so a lot of these have been single vision, right? Like a single creator has worked maybe with assistants, but for the most part, you're getting the original vision of this creator the entire way through. So, unlike superhero comics in the United States, where a writer and an artist may be paired together for a short amount of time, or it might be a writer with a whole list of artists. In this case, you're usually getting a solid team for the entire story,
Mhm.
or you're getting one person giving you their mostly unfiltered vision, which I think is admirable and something that I think American comics needs a little bit more of.
Yeah, it's like so much, like again, like, using an 80s example. It's like, have you ever read Howard Chaykin's American Flag?
I actually have a volume in the back here in my wasteland of an office.
So that's a perfect example of it. He has such a unique vision, such a like a story he's trying to tell, and that if that shifted to someone else for even an issue, it would have fallen apart.
Yeah, creators are what make all of this go. Like the
Mhm.
IP and the stories and the characters, that's what people are attracted to, but it's the creators that make it all happen. There is no storytelling, there is no comics, there is no artwork without the creators. So knowing that you're going to get the full vision and the full story from these creators, that's the stuff that really stands out to me the most.
Mhm.
And I think that's a great kind of transition to Watchmen, which enough has been said about how important Watchmen as a series is to the world of comics. If you haven't read it, you should. If you've never read comics, I don't recommend it be your first, because many people recommend Watchmen as like a first comic to read because of how important it is. I actually think you should check out some other stuff before you go into Watchmen, because it deconstructs a lot of the superhero tropes. It deconstructs a lot of what came before it. And I think that reading any and all other stories first helps you understand why Watchmen stands apart.
No, totally. And again, I hate to fly my American flag again, but Chaykin did it first with those cool TV screen panels with the narrator to help move the story along. And you see a lot of that in Watchmen. You also see a lot of it in The Dark Knight Returns. One of the things I always found interesting about Watchmen was that Alan Moore kind of originally pitched it as a weird reboot one-off story for all the Carlton characters like Blue Beetle and Captain Atom. So it's kind of interesting reading that through that filter and saying, oh, well, this was technically supposed to be Johnny Thunderbolt. And, and I wonder that like if they were given, okay, well, these are the characters that we need you to use, or you can use these characters as opposed to creating your own, would it be as impactful as it was? Because it's its own story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a great what if. And I think DC has tried to explore those types of things and take some of those characters down a grittier path in their own storylines. When you had Max Lord, spoiler alert, kill Blue Beetle back in Infinite Crisis, and you
It's almost 20 years, Ron. I think.
yeah, so it's fine to go over it now, but there are moments where they've tried to replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
They've tried to use Captain Atom in a specific way. They've tried to take these, stand-ins, the ones who were going to be the original characters and then got replaced, and try to put them into these darker storylines. And I think it could only have worked as it worked. I think Watchmen stands alone, and I don't want people to go and touch it, even though they've gone and touched it a lot.
Did you like the last Watchmen series on HBO?
I enjoyed it. I thought it could have been something entirely different. I don't think it really needed the Watchmen name to kind of exist and function. I think you could have done your own, like we were just talking about. I think you could have done your own storyline on that. I see there's a great question from Melissa H in our chat.
Yeah, and if anyone's watching, feel free to throw out your questions here. Melissa's question is, what is a good first comic book or series for someone who hasn't gotten into comic books yet?
It's a fantastic question, and I think it is a different answer for every person. I think it depends on what are the types of TV shows that you like, what are the types of books that you like to read, what are your favorite movies, and if you can find a series that is similar, a series that has certain storylines that are kind of analogous to that, that's a good path to go on. I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I do love Dragon Ball.
I think it's a good thing too, is because there's so many different styles, art wise, like, visually, which you see first, let alone getting into the different writers and how you take it, is that there's no wrong answer for it. It's what sticks out and what you connect with. Like, you could show the same artist to two different people and they could have wildly different opinions on it.
Absolutely. So much of it is up to personal taste, but when I used to work at a comic book store and somebody would come in and they were looking for a recommendation, what I said before, what are the TV shows that you're watching? And so there was stuff like Why the Last Man or Saga or Fables or stories that are not necessarily superheroes, but are, one set beginning, middle, and end feature, so that you can kind of get people into the rhythm of understanding how to read a comic and then falling in love with the story after that.
No, good question. And, I'm going to throw out another 80s recommendation here from, no, I'm sorry, it's for your next point, so I'm not going to spoil it. Okay, so what's next on your list, Ron?
Next on my list is Crisis on Infinite Earths, which we went from, I'm saying sometimes superhero stories aren't not the best introduction to, I think this one is so important because of the impact it had on the American way of telling stories in superhero. If you look at what's happening right now, Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man No Way Home and The Flash, all these films that are coming out right now, and they deal with the multiverse and they deal with multiple versions of characters and that sort of thing. Crisis on Infinite Earths was really one of those big, big moments in comics where they put all the different characters and the different versions together and they just had a ball with it. And they even did an adaptation for this with the CW's DC shows. But Crisis, amazing storytelling, amazing artwork by George Perez. It's just one of those things where in the moment it was huge. And then the effects that it has going forward where they are still trying to capture that magic. They're still trying to go back to that moment and try to have that same significance that this series had.
Yeah, George Perez's art on that was unbelievable. Like, there's so many background characters that are so beautifully rendered. Like, I don't know. You could definitely make an argument that that's one of, if not his greatest visual work.
So I'm going to grab the Absolute Edition.
Okay.
Which is right there. So hold on. This is the Absolute Edition of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Mm-hmm. So, this is the entire story arc in oversized hardcover format. And, like you said, I mean, the artwork is incredible. The level of detail that he put into each page, the fact that he made it through this when this is what sometimes the spreads look like. I mean, look at all the panels. Look at the amount of characters that are going on in here. It's truly, truly incredible. And I don't know if it's a feat that'll ever be matched.
No.
More detail in this.
And like with like that detail, the fact that there were no delays on it, like they hit their marks, everything shipped on time. And there was a couple double issues in it too, just to, move the story along.
It's just, there's nobody else like him. That's why he's a legend.
Yeah, no, he was definitely one of the great ones. So another the recommendation that I wanted to that actually segues better into Crisis of Infinite Earths was, have you ever read the Keith Giffen era Justice League with J.M. Donatis and Kevin Maguire? There's a couple other people, but they were the big three. And I love that so DC Comics had this big Crisis of Infinite Earths. It was to help relaunch their line. And Justice League, the premier superhero book, wasn't allowed to use any of the primary tier characters. So it felt like in a lot of ways, like a modern comparison would be The Boys, but without a lot of the vulgar and crassness. Like, it's a dysfunctional group of superheroes. It's very clever. It's very funny. Everyone's imperfect, but not in a way that, again, they're loathsome people. They're just a mess. Like, Booster Gold is constantly trying to find ways to monetize being a superhero. Guy Gardner is he's just a bully and everyone knows it. There's Ice and Fire, who are just odd and they don't fit in. Like, there's just so much great stuff in it. And like, you can read it. Like, I know that gets discounted a lot because it does rely a lot on the humor, but there's just so much like poignant character work and stuff. And it's great that at one point, I think they had 3 titles, because there's Justice League America, Justice League International, Justice League Europe, and other supplemental things. And it just, so much great stuff came out of that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite series. I've got, I think, the entire run and trade paperbacks on my shelf back there. Keith, that's again one of those things where they brought it back. They did a Justice League International series right during Brightest Day in 2011.
Yeah.
Again, one of those things they keep trying to capture. I can't believe it's not the Justice League. I think they had a series, but yeah, it's just the humor and the heart of the characters. They were able to do a lot with when you have these big stories with these big monolithic brands, right? Like DC has to keep Batman within a certain range. They can change him every once in a while, but eventually he goes back to a kind of version that all of us can recognize. What they're able to do with stuff like, JLI is they're able to take these lesser known characters and really give them lots of development and change aspects of them and dive deeper into them than you would have with, the main trilogy, the main trinity, or,
right.
some other bigger character, which I think it's the character stuff that really draws me in these days.
But yeah, I know. But like, even how they could take a mundane concept, or not really, or just odd. So there was a 2-issue story arc where Booster Gold and Blue Beetle wind up trying to open up their own timeshare business on a tropical island, which turns out to be a living monster. And like again, in theory, these plot points shouldn't make sense and shouldn't work, but they use like a funny concept backstory for a lot of development. And can I show you something of Keith Giffen's that I found here at East Brunswick Public Library that I didn't know existed?
By all means.
Okay, so this is my this is my hidden pick that I've been swearing by. Have you ever read Keith Giffen's Legion of Superheroes run from like the late 70s, early 80s?
I have not.
I didn't even know this was a thing. I was looking for something in the collection to help a customer, and that was on the shelf. And I said, "What is this?" And it's really cool. There's some awesome art from Dave Cockrum in there too. Legion of Superheroes was never something that I was interested in, but again, Keith Giffen is a creator that I respect a lot and love his works. It's like, okay, I'll give it a try. And now I want every bit of it. So check that out, everyone.
Right on. Yeah. The last one that I have for the 1980s is Secret Wars from Marvel. And, there's a movie adaptation coming in the next couple of years. We don't know if it's going to be on this original story arc, which came out in the 80s, or the more recent 2015 Secret Wars. This is a beloved crossover event, not so much for its story, but because of the things that came out of the story. You had the appearance of Spider-Man's symbiote suit. You had a lot of changes going on with the heroes and the villains interacting. It was just, as a kid, it was something that I love to just read over and over again. The idea of taking all the heroes and villains and throwing them on a planet where they can just fight and have this giant battle. Like, that's cool. That's like throwing all your action figures on the ground and then making a story as you go. So Secret Wars is, a personal favorite since when I was a kid. So I had to include it.
Oh, no, definitely. It's a great one. And like, being a little older than you is being a kid in the mid 80s when that dropped, which is really weird saying, oh yeah, like it's not a album, but it was the big tie-in of it was there was the Mattel toy line. They had these 3 3/4 inch like figures, all the Marvel ones. They were super adorable. And it was one of the most successful comics of all time because it was started out of a marketing push. It's like, how are we going to sell more toys? It's like, oh, well, let's do this super crossover that's going to change all this. It brought us the black Spider-Man costume. Yeah, which I can see that first right here in the back. Very nice.
Yep. I got this when I was like 15 at main MC Comics in Old Bridge.
Uh
So,
huh.
it was like, oh yeah, it's only $40. I'll pick it up. But $40 when I was 15 is a lot, you know,
Right.
when you don't have a job, that's a lot of money.
But it's definitely worth it. Like you said, that Black Spidey symbiote suit evolves into Venom at some point. There's also Secret Wars too, but nobody really likes to talk about that because it's not as good.
Not as good. There is the one scene where the Beyonder learns how to use a toilet, but aside
Yeah,
from that, I think it's mostly forgettable.
it is forgettable. Although, if you want to spend some time going down the Google wormhole, the first issue of it was originally or not written, I would say, drawn by Sal Buscema, and then him and Jim Shooter, the Marvel writer editor, had some falling out, and so he was pulled from it. And like the art on that was just really good, and it kind of pains me that it didn't go in that direction. So, not that Al Milgram slouched, but
Our pal
what could
Sal.
have been.
I love Sal's stuff. He did a lot of Spectacular Spider-Man,
Yeah,
and so that's I really have an affinity for his artwork.
I like how like his style, like he was clearly like from that classic Marvel 60s and the 70s, but like he was still getting regular work into the mid 90s, and he knew how to adapt his style just enough to make it fit with like the current trends, but not seem like he was forced, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.